Hello again, fish-a-lots. What if I told you that this very simple fishing technique could be the difference between you out fishing all your buddies all the time and finding your own honey holes and finding them quickly versus sitting in a fleet of boats, sitting shoulder to shoulder on the beach, on a jetty, wherever you might be fishing, catching no fish and wondering, what did I do to deserve this on my day off? Would you try it? Would you do it? Well, a buddy of mine ran into the same issues. He made a couple of adjustments and he killed it all season long. He went from making his brothers jealous from fishing with Johnny Fish-a-Lot to actually doing it himself, and they absolutely loaded the boat with stripers using these very, very simple techniques that just go so overlooked by so many fish-a-lots out there. So you might ask, what could he possibly change about your approach when striper fishing that could cause you to make the difference between the banner boat on the day catching so many fish and being frustrated not catching anything? Well, it's these techniques that we're going to get into that you've probably ignored in the past and that 90% of fish-a-lots out there ignore, and it's costing them a lot of fish. So I'm going to reveal to you the very rarely discussed tactics of how trolling for striper actually work and the nuances involved, and how that could actually work to your advantage when you do some more striper fishing that you really do want to do, right? Like casting to them with lures and catching them with the rod in your hand. You wouldn't believe how important trolling techniques are to sorting out the other end of that and to really enjoying yourself out there on the water. So let's reveal some of these fishing secrets that nobody really discusses that could get you on the fish, find your honey holes, and catch you maximum fish every time you hit the water. Let's get into it. And all right, and so for this first tip, let me ask you a question. How many times have you loaded up the boat or loaded up your beach cart, whatever it might be, of all that crap they tell you need to buy from the store in order to catch fish? You wheel your cart down to the beach or you turn your boat out of that inlet and you're just met with a vast expanse of the ocean. There's no birds there telling you where fish are. Fish aren't showing themselves. And what do you do then? Very few fish-a-lots out there will actually do the pre-trip planning to figure out your A, B, C, and D backup spots or backup things when nature doesn't quite go to plan with you thought you were going to do for your fishing strategies. So what do most fish-a-lots do? Well, to be honest with you, most fish-a-lots will find just a gaggle of people on the beach or on that jetty or that big pile of boats that are sitting in a certain area, and your FOMO sets in, right? The fear of missing out. Well, if that many fish-a-lots are over there, there's got to be fish. They got to be on something. Why else would people be there? And the answer is because there's a lot of fish-a-lots out there. I would say 90% of them that really don't know how to find their own fish. So there's two scenarios here. One scenario is exactly that. Fish-a-lots are going off of old reports or people told them to go without a clue if there's actual fish there or not. And then you don't want to fall into that trap of fishing where there's no fish just because there's a large group of people fishing where there's no fish. Or the other scenario is you had a group of good fish-a-lots that actually did locate the fish and were on fish, but a lot of people found out about it and then just swarmed that area, and now 100 boats are beating over 50 fish with casts, lures, trolling, you name it. And I have seen nothing in nature destroy a bite of fishing like human beings can. So 100 boats over 50 fish realistically means you have access to maybe 2 fish, and you don't want to be stuck in that boat either. So the alternative here is knowing how to find your own spots with open water trolling. That's right, open water trolling is different from your general constructs of structure or fishing over structure. Most fish-a-lots out there think of structure like your shipwrecks, your big boulders, your mussels, your big flats, shoals, things that you could visually see or that your depth finder could readily pick up and let you know that a big piece of structure is there to fish. Open water fishing consists about 90% of striper trolling out there and 90% of the nuance that's going to allow you to find those very unique honey holes that are going to go overlooked by most fish-a-lots out there, and it's going to catch you a ton of fish. So the way you do this is, quite frankly, directly go on Navionics at home on your computer before you even hit the water fishing, or you could do it on your chart plotter while you're in your boat or your kayak or whatever you might be fishing from. And what you're going to do is you want to find some nuances in that bottom structure. This could be those contour lines really close together. That signifies a significant drop off where fish might hang or position themselves to take advantage of fish coming over that ledge, right? It could be something like a small mound, maybe 5 to 15 feet sticking up, where fish could position themselves either side of the current and come out and ambush their prey. This could be a flat or a point or something underwater that isn't obvious to the naked eye when you're fishing, something that is going to go overlooked. That gives you a huge edge, because as you're trolling over these areas, okay, you're covering a lot of water and you're finding out where these fish are. When you catch a fish, here's another quick tip, make sure you mark that on your chart plotter, because over time you're going to see a story of where these fish relate to structure and how they relate to structure with the different tides or water movement. And that could be key when you're in a really, really tough day and the bite is really, really tough, and you're going to go to your own go-to spots that you know haven't been hit. And that is really key to separating yourselves from all your buddies doing the same thing everybody else is doing and what you're doing to catch massive amounts of fish and beautiful fish to boot. And the reason why I say that is because larger striper, the really big fish, are going to associate with these structures a lot more than the smaller fish that are going to be moving up and down the beach or the migration fish. Big fish on their migration will find these type of structures that are going to allow them to ambush food, because big fish got big for a reason. They're very smart and they know how to conserve their energy and get high profile meals or high calorie meals. And this is how they do it. They'll locate these structures, they'll sort out these structures, and they'll use those structures to ambush prey. And you should be looking at those same structures to catch yourself some really big fish. And all right, so another tip here. Now that you know what kinds of structures you should be looking for even before you hit the water or while you're on the water trolling, looking for these specific type of spots, well, the other piece to this is how exactly do you approach those spots? So most fish lots out there, they'll find a contour line and they'll troll straight up it. They'll just put the boat in autopilot and they'll just start moving the boat. Yeah, do they find some kind of spots? Maybe, but they're not really approaching the spots in a way that's going to be advantageous for you to catch fish. So here's a couple of the basic trolling tips that you need to know in order to really take advantage of active feeding fish and find your own. Now, probably the most overlooked tip here is to kind of fish in an S-curve or a snake pattern. Incorporate a lot of turns into your trolling. This does a number of things in your advantage. One thing is you're covering different angles of different structures. Okay, so as you turn the boat, you're covering the different zones, the different water columns there that fish could be laying in. So if you're fishing a drop off from 20 feet to 50 feet of water and you're S turning, okay, you're not just trolling up the 30-foot mark on that drop off. You're actually covering all the water depth and all those possible strike zones that those fish might be looking for bait. Now, if you start catching fish in 30 feet of water and you notice that those fish are hanging in 30 feet of water, then you can make that adjustment and fish that line where most of those fish are hanging. If they're right on bottom in 50 feet, then you know to fish 50 feet. Now, this channel is all about teaching the fundamentals of fishing so that you could watch one video, in this case a striper fishing video, and apply it to any fish that you might be fishing for out there, like catfish, carp, largemouth bass, tuna. Like any one of these fish, you could use these same tactics even if you're fishing in a pond and still apply this to your fish. And this is exactly what I teach on this channel. So in this case, you can watch this video here where I do exactly that to hone in on where big catfish are laying in the current. So 3 days before, all the catfish were in 25 feet of water. I started in 25 feet of water. Notice I wasn't doing as well. Hey, you know, guilty as charged. It's very difficult to go from a different spot when you had success in the past, but able to pivot, fish 30, 40, 50 feet, figured out that all the big catfish were laying in 50 feet of water, and we caught some monsters by figuring it out. And that's exactly what I'm encouraging you to do on the troll for striped bass fishing. So now another advantage that fishing with a lot of turns will give you is that even by the nature of turning the boat itself, you're going to allow your lures to fish a wider range of that water column, finding a possible strike zone. So as you turn the boat, on the inside of the turn, your lures are going to fall in the water column, and on the outside of the turn, your lures are going to raise in the water column. So just by the nature of turning the boat, you're fishing a wide variety of possible strike zones for those fish. And you'll be surprised, just that raise in the water column or a fall in the water column could often signify like a spooked bunker or something like that, and could trigger bites in and of itself. So that is a great way to alter where you're fishing in that water column to determine where those fish are hanging, in addition to covering different aspects of that structure. Again, trolling down the line and coming back up the line if you're fishing a drop off, maybe a point, a shoal, a flat, whatever it might be under that water that's going unobserved by many fish lots out there. Now, along that same respect of kind of controlling the depth of your lures, what you really also want to do is fish with the current. So troll with the current, because that is going to be the most natural presentation of your lures to the fish. In the natural environment, fish will typically swim with current, and those striper are going to use that structure we're talking about to position themselves in certain ways to ambush that fish as the current comes over those spots. Again, this is a fundamental skill that covers all sorts of fishing, even bass fishing. In this video here, the wind is blowing and I'm casting into the wind and retrieving my lure with the wind to get these giant largemouth, because they're associating the structure and they're waiting for that water movement to bring the bait to them. And striped bass are no different. So always be trolling with the current. There is terrible advice out there on YouTubes and all the internets that say, you know, troll against the current, go across the current, you know, trying to find the fish. Don't worry about any of that. Just worry about presenting your bait in the most natural way possible, and that's the way to do it. Now, another advantage of trolling with the current is that you can control your lure's water depth that much easier, which allows you more control over where those baits are fishing in a possible strike zone. So if you're fishing against the current, what will happen is that current is going to be pushing against your baits, and you're going to get like a kite type of effect where it's going to push your bottom baits way up off the bottom. So you're not going to be able to maintain contact with the bottom or close vicinity to that bottom possible strike zone. And if you're fishing baits in the middle of the water column, it's most likely going to push them up almost to the surface of the water. And that may not be where you want to be fishing. So if you're fishing with the current, you have control over where those baits are placed in those strike zones, and you're not leaving it up to chance as that current kind of does whatever they want to do with the lures. With that same respect, another tip here, fish lots, is line selection is so hugely important when you're talking about the strike zones and this type of fishing, trolling for big striper. Now, on your main line, you absolutely got to be using braid, because braid is so thin in diameter, it's going to allow you to get these big lures all the way down to the bottom in that strike zone. Or if you're fishing umbrella rigs, it's going to allow you to get those umbrella rigs exactly where you want in that water column. If you're using monofilament as your main line, it's just much thicker in diameter, and it's going to catch that water, and that line is going to push up in the water, and also monofilament wants to float. So you're kind of fighting against yourself trying to drop these heavy baits in heavy current while you're trolling. And that's usually important for those strike zones. So braid is an absolute key for your main line. Now, for your leader material, it's absolutely key for you to use, that's right, monofilament. So you don't want mono on your main line, but you absolutely want monofilament on your leader lines. So your leader are going to be connected to these big old Mojos. I use tandem rigs, so we're using monofilament because these are heavy lures. This is a 32-ounce lure right here. So when a fish hits this at a troll, you want that monofilament to give you a lot of shock absorption. Also, that shock absorption is important if you're fishing a tandem rig like this and you get two big striper on at the same exact time. What happens all the time. These are schooling fish, and when you catch one fish, you're very likely to catch another fish. And so you want that shock absorption in that mono so that you don't break off fish, or that you're not pulling this big hook right out of the fish's mouth and you're getting fish lip soup in return. That is hugely, hugely important for monofilament. Now, you might hear some fish lots out there, they're saying, well, you know, monofilament, it's too much stretch, you're not gonna get a good hook set, or, you know, it's too thick in diameter and the fish know the line is there. That's nothing but a bunch of nonsense when it comes to striper fishing. Striper are not line shy at all. We are fishing with 80 and 100 pound monofilament with these big Mojos because you're talking 32 ounces of weight right here. You don't want to be using light line. And that monofilament, since those stripers are not line shy at all, they don't care one bit about that line diameter. That shock absorption is really, really important when you're trolling for any fish. When we go tuna fishing, we never tuna troll with just straight braid to the lures or straight fluorocarbon to the lures. There's no stretch in those things. So when that fish hits, it's either gonna tear out of the fish's mouth, you're not gonna get a good hook set, or you could possibly break something off or break a piece of your equipment. And these things are expensive fish lots. A tandem Mojo rig is like $55, $60. You don't want to be breaking this stuff off. Trust me, use some monofilament. You can't go wrong. I've learned this stuff over 8 years of fishing, where I had to fish every single day in order to make money. And if you didn't catch fish, you didn't make money. So monofilament's the way to go for these Mojos on your leader material, both for umbrella rigs and big heavy baits that you're gonna drop to the bottom. And all right, fish lot, so if you're finding these tips helpful, make sure to leave me a comment below with any questions you may have so I could kind of, you know, expound on these tips a little bit more. Or check out my Fish a Lot membership community below, where for just the cost of 1 cup of coffee a month, you get this cool little icon and I get notified directly that you have a question for me, so I can drop everything I'm doing and answer the questions you may have. So go ahead and check it out. It'll be in the link to the description below, and I hope to see you in there. All right, let's get back to the tips. So next question I typically get from fish-a-lots out there is, what is the perfect speed to troll in order for me to catch all my striper I want? And there is no real perfect speed for these fish, but I will tell you the perfect speed is slow. Just go slowly. These are not tuna, these are not wahoo. Going slower is usually the better. Now, there's no rules to fishing. These are general guidelines. So I will tell you, varying your speeds throughout the day is hugely important to figure out what those fish's preferences are. These fish change their preferences. They're wild animals at the end of the day, and you have to figure them out day by day. So typically speaking, a starting point is anywhere from 1 to 4 miles per hour on a troll will do you just great. That's a general rule there. Or if you're stuck on knots, 1 to 3.5 knots. By the way, when you're talking about that low of speed, knots and miles per hour don't really make a difference. 1 knot is 1.15 mile per hour. So 3.5 knots is about 4 miles per hour. So 1 to 3.5 knots, 1 to 4 miles per hour, be perfectly fine for your troll. Now, what do I mean by varying your speeds? Well, we already covered it. If you incorporate a lot of turns into your trolling up and down structure, that's one way to do that, to change speed. Again, your lures on the inside are gonna drop, so they're gonna go slower in that water column. That's a change of speed. The lures on the outside are gonna come up in the water column. They're gonna go a little bit faster. That's a change of speed. That's one way to do it. Or just use the throttles. So you can drop back on the throttle every once in a while and pull up on the throttle every once in a while. The best way I found to do this is when you're trolling and you come across an area that just really looks good, right? Go over it and drop that speed down. And as you drop that speed down, those lures are gonna fall in the water column, and then you pick that speed back up and those lures are gonna pick back up in the water column. That often signifies a spooked bunker, and again, can trigger bites for these really big fish. Now, specifically, how do you address this, right? The change of speed as it relates to structure and fish? Well, it's not as hard as you might think. So let's say you're coming over a pod of fish and you see just a big bunker pod on that depth finder sounder of yours, and you notice there's some fish underneath or they're being pushed up off the bottom. That's a good indication that there's striper there pushing those fish and attacking them from underneath. So what you want to do is, as you troll through that school of bunker, right, keep in mind how far back your lures are. So maybe count anywhere from 5 to 15 seconds. Once you see that on the screen, drop the throttle back. And what that will do is, As those lures are in that zone, those lures will fall in that water column right in the middle of that school that you saw on the depth finder. Then count maybe 5 seconds, anywhere from 3 to 7 seconds, somewhere in there, and put that throttle back up. And that will signify that spooked bunker. Now, if you go through an area like that and that does not work, circle back and hit it again and just mess around with those timings a little bit. The other thing you could do, which is far easier and just goes overlooked by so many fish lots out there, is just grab the line as you come through the school and just start jigging it. Just pull the line up and down, just like this. And what that'll do is that'll cause those lures to jump up in the water column and fall back down. Jump up and fall back down. And that's often enough to catch a fish or trigger those bites. Again, talking about the fundamental skills of fishing, you'll see this in my largemouth bass fishing videos all the time, where I accomplish this just by turning the reel hand a little bit faster and then slowing it down, or picking the rod tip up a little bit and slowing it down. Or when we're tuna fishing, you can see this exact same thing for huge fish, where we're either miss a fish or we're coming through a school of fish and we just start jigging those lures to make sure those fish know it's there, get the attention, and get a strike. Another thing you could do, if you do get a strike and you miss, drop it back. Just hit that bail, drop that line back. That'll signify that the fish is injured or got hit. And then as you click that reel back, as you engage the reel again and that lure starts coming through the water column, very often that's when you'll get a strike. Trust me, these tactics work throughout all sorts of fisheries, in all sorts of occasions, on all sorts of structures. And really, these are just great ways to trigger bites, especially when the fishing is slow and the bite is tough. And many of your buddies out there, they're just gonna hit troll, drive straight, not worry about it, and leave everything up to chance. You don't wanna do that, fish-a-lots. You wanna follow these tips so that you can catch most amount of fish. Now, along those same lines of controlling those lures in the appropriate strike zones is make sure that you're trolling your lures at different lengths. So for example, if I'm fishing 2 Mojos here, I'm gonna drop these Mojos back at different lengths. So maybe this one hits the bottom and I engage the reel right away and I know this is fishing just off the bottom, and maybe this one I'm gonna let out just a little bit further so that it's closer to the bottom. If I'm fishing 2 umbrella rigs, what I want to do is I want to put them at staggered distances from the boat. I don't want to be fishing all 4 lines I'm trolling with at the exact same distance from the boat. That kind of goes into everything that we just discussed in the previous tips. When you turn the boat, varying the depths in your troll, dropping lures back, you name it. It's really key to figure out what those fish's preferences are during the day, and those preferences can really make a difference. If you notice the lure right on the bottom is getting hit, then I'm going to put more lures closer to the bottom. If I notice that the lure higher in the water column is getting hit, right, that'll be the lure closest to the boat as opposed to the line that I let further out from the boat. Then I'll start bringing those lures up in the water column. It makes all the difference in the world when you're trying to figure out what these fish's preferences are. Now, along that same respect, let's say a buddy of yours does hook up in a really nice fish off a Mojo here, and he starts reeling in a fish. Well, what's to prevent you from casting something like this out? This is a 4-ounce bucktail on a 5-inch paddle tail, something I can very easily cast with some of the gear I have. All this gear, by the way, will be in the link in the description below, so make sure to check it out. I want to make your lives as easy as possible, fish-a-lots, to catch you as much amount of fish as possible, and a lot of the gear I use and catch a ton of fish with will be linked down below for you to check out. But throw this in the general vicinity of where your buddy starts reeling in a fish. So free spool it, let it sink down to where you know this lure is in the water column. So if this lure is right on bottom, I'm gonna let a lot of line out to make sure I get this as close to bottom as I can. Or if it's an umbrella rig and it's high up in the water column, I'm gonna cast this out and I know where I'm fishing with each of my lines so that I know where I'm casting this lure. I can't tell you how many times I cast out different size lures after these fish once a buddy of mine hooks up or something, and I catch so much extra fish that way just casting to them. And that's where the troll really provides itself to fishing techniques that most fish-a-lots out there want to do, which is to cast to a fish, reel in, feel that explosive bite of a striper, hook it, reel it in yourself as opposed to trolling. That's one way you can absolutely do it. The other way, of course, is as you're finding these spots, as you're trolling, you're starting to figure out these little honey holes. When you know water movement's coming, the current's changing, tide's changing, whatever the case might be, you can find these spots and there's nothing preventing you from sitting on there and jigging up those fish. And you know those fish are gonna hold on those spots because of the lessons you learned trolling. So that's right, trolling is the key technique here that can lead you to successful jigging spots that you and only you are going to be able to figure out. Now, along those same lines of trolling and switching things up and having different distances, switch up the colors of your baits and the sizes of your baits. Again, you'd be amazed at how many big stripers sometimes will prefer smaller baits, like this 5-inch paddle tail on a much smaller umbrella rig right here. This is a big mojo. This is a 9-inch paddle tail versus a 5-inch paddle tail. And sometimes the fish are telling you they want bigger profile baits versus smaller profile baits. Another thing that goes overlooked a lot of times is a lot of big fish are caught off of smaller baits. They're just honed in on things like peanut bunker, and those big fish are expecting something like peanut bunker to come by. So now take this video for example. We're trolling, we're fishing with mojos, we're fishing these smaller lures, bigger lures, and we do catch some really nice fish. Now, what the troll told us was that those fish's preferences were chartreuse and slightly smaller lures, right? So the 7-inch lure categories were catching more fish than these big 9-inch bucktails. So now later in the day, when that tide turned and that current really picked up, we were ready for them with these little guys right here. These are 7-inch bustin' bait. I think these are lime truce color lures. So lime truce, this is a chartreuse color. They were hitting smaller mojos, smaller lures, so we matched what they were eating, and that was peanut bunker. So these 7-inch lures far outproduced the really big lures. On different days, they're maybe feeding on full-size bunker, and these bigger lures will do the trick, and so we'll go to bigger bucktails and bigger presentations when we're casting to them. It literally sometimes is just that easy. And another thing you want to consider when you're trolling is use lures with a lot of vibration, like this umbrella rig right here. Okay, you want to use these lures. I typically go with these big paddle tails, things like that. Like that is going to cause a lot of vibration in that water column to get those fish's attention. Typically when we're trolling, we're fishing at depth, okay, anywhere from 20 to 50 feet, sometimes shallower, but the water clarity is not great. Those fish are honing in on big bunker or even peanut bunker, but the vibrations. Something like this umbrella rig signifies a school of fish, which is going to get an attention of a big hungry striper. And those are typically the types of lures that I use to troll with. You can troll with plugs, you can troll with spoons. It's the same type of notion, right? You want to fish with lures that are giving off a lot of vibration so that those fish can detect those lures through the water column, hone in on it, bite it, and maybe you get yourself a really nice striper. So when we're talking about lure fishing, right, like this is the more fun way to fish, and so many people like snub their nose to trolling. Here's a basic tip that could help you out, right? I hope you're sitting down, you have a glass of water, some take it easy, right? This is gonna rock your world. Hold the rod while you're trolling, and then you'll get that same explosive striper bite and feel as you do when you're reeling in the fish. It's sometimes, you know, we overcomplicate fishing so much. That's just such a great way to take advantage of trolling to actually find these fish and trigger very finicky fish, because let's face it, sometimes stripers just want to cooperate, but you're going to put fish in the boat and you get the addition of having the fun of feeling that fish bite when you first get them. I mean, it's a great way to do it, and it's just overlooked again by so many fish-a-lots out there. I'd recommend that. Give that a try, and maybe you'll take to trolling for striper a little bit better this coming season. And so learning how to troll for stripers can absolutely be key to your fishing success in finding your own spots, figuring out where those fish are, being the only fish-a-lots on those fish. So if you want to see just how valuable these tips are and take your fishing to the next level and make sure that you're out fishing your buddies on the water each and every time you go, check out this video right here where that's exactly what me and my friend did. We hit the troll, we hit spots away from the fleet, and we were able to catch fish, and we were the only boat catching fish out there on a very tough bite. So check it out, and I'll see you out there on the water, fish-a-lots.